לכי לך to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha to a place you do not know.
Ami Baran is a neighbor of mine, living in the same moshav. He is a sports specialist. He is a lawyer. He knows so many different things, and he will be just sharing a very small fraction of his knowledge and his experience with us today. And I hope he will share another part of his experience as a lawyer at the disputed territories some other time. And on top of that, I also know Ami for many years because Noam was playing softball for many years. And so in a way, Ami was in charge of the softball team here in Moshav Maor, which grew to be one of the best softball teams in Israel. So I'm very happy and honored and privileged to welcome Ami Baran to start sharing his screen and share his presentation. So Ami, bevakasha, המסך שלך.
Okay, all right. Now everybody can hear me, I hope, right? That's for sure. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up, just if I can see it. Whoever can show me, they can see it. So first of all, I'm just going to, I'd just like to get a picture of what's happening here. How many people know anything about sports in Israel? I mean, is this something that you guys know about? Have you heard about? Is there anything at all that you know about sports in Israel?
IBL.
The Israel Baseball League.
Yep.
Very little.
Okay. All right. I'll touch on that 1 second before I start the presentation. What did you know about the IBL, just out of curiosity?
There were a few teams, a bunch of ex-major leaguers, Jewish major leaguers. I can rattle off a number of names that played or had coached for various teams in the IBL. I don't know how many teams, where they're located. I'm not sure if it still exists, but...
So really quick, I'll tell you. The IBL started in 2007, the Israel Baseball League. There were 6 teams, 6 coaches. We've had from the Mets, we had everybody from there, and I was the only Israeli coach of one of the teams.
Okay.
So there you go. I was the IBL, the Netanya Tigers. I didn't expect anybody to tell me they heard of the Israel Baseball League.
No.
It ceased to exist at one point. There was a backdrop of funding, of course, and that was the issue. But it did come to the end, and they played 1 season in Israel, and maybe in the future there will be more. Anybody else hear anything about sports in Israel?
My friend's grandson was on the All-Star team that was supposed to travel to the UAE and competed in that tournament.
In March.
Yeah. So I believe because of too much prevalence of COVID over there, but his grandson was on the team.
Interesting, because I'll be taking a team over there in May, so it's almost the same thing. But I'll get to that too.
I know
anybody else want?
You have basketball and soccer, or basketball and football over there. Okay.
All right.
I met Hal Brody at one point.
Hal Brody. That's interesting. That's great.
Amari Studemeyer plays for the Israel Basketball League. He owns one of the teams.
Okay. Who's that?
I went to school with Charles
Studemeyer.
Right.
You have the Maccabea every 4 years.
Right.
You have hockey up at Metula and now elsewhere.
That's right. We do have hockey now.
You have martial arts.
All the time. We have very good martial arts people here. Okay, so
fencing. Fencing.
Dancing, yeah, we have what we call dancing. It's part of our non-Olympic sports, which I'll touch on that today too.
Not dancing, fencing. CF.
Oh, fencing. Yes, of course. We had really good fencing too.
Yes.
I actually had one who studied with me in the university here. It was one of our top.
My boyfriend's son is Tomer Orr, and he was in the Olympics in Beijing.
There you go. We know Tomer Orr. Okay, so I'll get going a little, and I'll give you a little rundown. Let's see if my thing's gonna work. Okay, a little about me, really quick. My father, I'm the son of Benjamin Baran. May he rest in peace. He was a partisan fighter during World War II. His whole family, though, was lost in the Holocaust, except for him. A son of Henya Baran, kidnapped by my father at one point. We don't know where. I made Aliyah to Israel when I was 13. I'm from Chicago. I grew up in Chicago until I was 13. I came here 5 times before that to Israel with my mother. Some long relatives or friends from the same town my parents came from Poland, Belarusia. And in the end, I came on the Youth Aliyah program by myself. This was the day, by the way, that I left the United States with my friends sitting around me. And that was the day that I left the United States and came to study at a place called Hatikva, which was a boarding school for a lot of immigrants, youth immigrants. While I was playing in America, I played baseball all my life. And I had a pretty good arm until the age of 13. And when I moved to Israel, they discovered that they didn't have baseball here, but we did have javelin throwing. And I became the Israeli champion in throwing the javelin for over 13 years. I was also a team handball player. We have team handball in Israel as opposed to regular handball against the wall. And I'm also a phys ed major from Wingate Institute, which most athletes in Israel do. They usually, if we're at a certain level of an international level, some of us don't know where we're going to go with our lives. We don't know if we're going to be lawyers. We don't know what we're going to do. A lot of us go into phys ed, not that we're going to become teachers, but it's more like an idea that you can continue to train while you're at the phys ed facilities, which is Wingate Institute, by the way. So I was for many years the champion in javelin throwing. Then I became the head coach for the throwing events on Israel's national Olympic team. We didn't have too many Olympians in the throws. However, later on when we had the Russian immigration coming in, the Aliyah from Russia, we had a few pretty good Russian throwers that came into Israel, and they lived here and they represented us in different in competitions, tournaments throughout Europe. Like you saw, I was javelin, softball, and baseball. I've represented Israel in 10 World Maccabiah games, 10 European championships, and 1 World Championship. We flew the flag a lot of times out there representing Israel. The Maccabiah games, as was mentioned before, is something that it's something that every athlete in Israel really looks forward to. Of course, European championships, World Championships, and Olympics also is something that everybody is really, really waiting for, and to represent Israel, to put the flag on their shoulders as much as possible. Okay, here we go. My other part, where Yulia said I'm a lawyer. Well, I was a lawyer, and I started working in the Israeli police force for many years. I worked at the West Bank. I was the beginning. I started the prosecution service in the police for the area of Judea and Samaria. And after a while, I became head of investigations and intelligence. And that was my job until I retired, which now I am. I'm retired now. So I also was a prosecutor at the Central District of Israel for a while, just before I went into the police. And it was an interesting part of my life. But the most important part is here. I'm married to Dalit. That's not me, who she's got her chin on. Daughter Shai. She's 24-year-old, studying law right now. My son Amit just finished his army service, and he is doing a year of extra work on a kibbutz. It's what they do, some of these kids after the army. My daughter Adi, she's 20 years old. She's on the Israel national team for softball. She is doing her service for the army. Well, it's not the army, it's more like the national service, because she does have an immune disease which prevented her from going in to serve. So she became, she's doing her Shirut Leumi, as we call it, her national service. And of course, I have my daughter Mayan. She's 12 years old, and she runs this whole household right now. So it's an interesting life that we have over here. And that's it. That's all about me. I'm going to talk a little bit about Israel sports today. I'm going to give you a little background, try to open up and show you what's really happening here in Israel and how things run. But I will give you a little bit of historical background. And, people are saying that a lot of things that we hear, and I do a lot of meetings and lectures, and we do a lot of things over the United States and Canada. People really don't realize why haven't we got 100 medals at Olympics, and why aren't we hearing Hatikva all the time at the main tournaments out through the world? And so there's a little bit of a background here that maybe some of you know, maybe some don't, but I'll get into it a little bit. So historically, the Judaism and the sports did not mix. During the Greek rule of the land of Israel, of course, we all know that the view of the sport was more of a Greek concept. So most of the people there, where the Olympics were happening, things like that, participants were also required to offer gifts to the Greek god Hercules. So as you can probably understand, that sort of pushed a lot of this off, and it was always sort of said, we're not going to be involved in those kind of things that are happening. And then, of course, we move on to later on when they moved into the Roman period. There was also an issue that the sports were more associated with cruelty and violence, such as the gladiators and things like that. So that also sort of kept things, separate from everybody. However, we did have, of course, everybody knows King Herod, and he sort of built stadiums around the region, and there they had things like boxing, they had archery and racing, and of course the gladiatorial disciplines. But still, it just didn't, they still believed that this was I think they called it the Hellenistic evil, and it was like, we don't want to get involved with that. And I'll tell you, there are some ultra-Orthodox today that still believe that it's not proper, and I'll get into some of that later about how we have to deal with certain things as Israel's governing bodies for sports in Israel. There we go. So in the Middle Ages, we have the Rambam, he was a physician, and he was probably one of the first ones that actually came out and said, hey, this is healthy for your body, and it's good for the mind and soul. So there's a lot of rabbis today that are using that as also an area where they can say, well, it's good to do sports, it's good to keep a healthy mind and soul, and it's done today through that. If we move on from that, and here starts a little bit of the fun part, there was a rise in popular ball games, and there was a big rabbinical discussion about this the Shabbat. Are we allowed to play on Shabbat? Are we not allowed to play on Shabbat? I'll give you a little bit of an area of here what's happened with us in our baseball and our softball in Israel. One of the things that did come up was we had national teams that compete in European championships, and there's Saturday games. They'll start on a Monday and they'll go through the Saturday. And on that Saturday, there might be a final, a semifinal, quarterfinals. What do we do if we have religious players on our teams? So I'm going to give you a little bit of how this works. So some of the girls couldn't do it. Some could come, or some of the boys, they can walk to the field and play. Some couldn't even come. They had to be placed, they were far off. We would always look for hotels that would be close to the field so that if there were the religious players that can walk to the field. One of the rabbis, not far from where we live, came up with one. They said that you can play in a game, but you can't wear your cleats. And for people that don't understand the cleats, is that the cleats are, it'll dig up the land, and such. You can't do that on the Sabbath. So they were told you can wear actually gym shoes while you're playing your game. So I'm just giving you a little bit, and there will be a little more later. Well, I'll tell you how we might have even lost a medal in the Olympics because of because we're Israel, and how we abide by the rules and of the laws of Judaism and everything. Then, of course, we had the chief Rabbi Cook, who actually said the same thing as this was the 20th century already, where he also came up and said that it serves the soul and it's good for yourself and everything. And that's where there's a split, and where they came towards that we can start having more sports within our organizations. I'm going to move on to, everybody's heard of the modern Maccabees. We know the Maccabees from the past. What I would like to say was that the Maccabi movement in Europe, was something that started to really progress. And that's where many communities actually, they established, first organized sporting endivars. It's just something that started to happen. And I think it was 1914, there were over 100 Maccabee clubs across Europe at that time. And that's, that was a real beginning for the Jewish movement and the Maccabi movement. Actually, we had some of the largest clubs in some of the places here. Maybe people have their families that came from those areas. Hakoach Vienna, Bar Kochva of Berlin, the MTK of Budapest, and Hagibol of Prague. Those were the main clubs that really had outstanding teams and outstanding players. And it was really a movement that allowed for the concept to start to grow in the minds of the Jewish people that were in Europe. And we'll talk about what happened in 1932. 1932 brings us to where we had our first Maccabea Games. The first Maccabea Games, it attracted over about 500 Jewish athletes from 23 different countries. If anybody really wants to know, the Maccabea is something that every Jewish kid who plays, and I'm sure some of you have kids or grandchildren who are aspiring maybe to get to the next one, which will be in a few years. And the idea is that we grab everybody together. Tal Brody was one of them, by the way, and he after that made Aliyah to Israel. Was to bring us all together, and hopefully most and many of these Jewish athletes would make Aliyah and help us build the country. In 1935 with the second Maccabiah, and of course during that time was a really difficult time, and people were really afraid to move around, and they were threatened by Germany and all the ideas of what was happening out there. So there was a bit of a they weren't sure how many people were going to show up and what was going to happen. It was just something hanging over that whole time during that. So the Maccabiah was really something that started to progress. And of course, we've already had, every 4 years, we've had Maccabea Games. And the Maccabea Games represent really like the Jewish Olympics, I would put it to you. So today it's the third largest sporting event worldwide, by the way. If you go online and you check it out, you will see that the numbers are really growing. Just to say, when we have our opening ceremony, I've been in quite a few, like you saw before. I've been in 10 Maccabea Games, and World Maccabea Games. Every time I enter the stadium and there's, the 30,000 people there, and each team comes in just like in the Olympics, and we walk around, the feeling it's incredible. And the feeling even more that it's us. It's the Jewish state. It's everything that's happening. And it's a big rush when we all go in there. I've had friends who couldn't stop crying while they were walking into the stadium. Usually we had it in Ramat Gan, which is an older stadium. And then they moved it to Jerusalem at one point. And that's where we're having the most of the time now. So that was really an important part of my life as an Israeli who came from the United States. And I've represented, like I said, Israel for so many years. All my friends now who are Americans and Canadians who've come over really grown to be like family. I'm going to stop now. Has anybody got any questions right now about any of this? We can do if you have any questions in the middle, or do you prefer to do them at the end? I'm asking Ilana and Steve.
If there are any questions now, so you're welcome to ask those. By the way, you did mention that we had a softball Maccabea Games here at the Maol Field. So
yeah, I'm gonna get to that when I get to the softball dreams. I'll let them know what we did here. We had softball dreams, and I'll explain that also.
I just want to ask: is anyone else having? I know Pam was having trouble typing in the chat. Is anyone else having trouble? It may have been a setting.
I can type fine. I have no problem.
No, but Julia, you're a host. What were you saying, Carol?
I think they fixed it because I was just going to chat, and now I decided since he asked, I was going to say it out loud because it's faster for me.
Okay.
I'm not very aware of sports in Israel and the whole Maccabi game, so please excuse my ignorance. But in the games, is it only Jewish athletes that come to it, and is it always in Israel?
Okay, so the World Maccabiah Games is always in Israel. Now, you have to understand what usually is done is that it's usually run by organizations within the different countries. So Maccabi Britain, Great Britain, Maccabi USA, Maccabi Canada. They're usually the Maccabi group, which I'll touch a little bit later about what Maccabi is and Apoel is. But yes, so they all have their criteria of who is a Jew, by the way. So it could be a grandparent, it could be a great grandparent, it could be the mother, it could be the father. They will not just say, hey, your mother has to be Jewish, your father has to be. If you consider yourself Jewish and you're part of the Jewish community and everything like that, then they will put you on your Maccabi Canada team, Maccabi USA. That's the usual norm. Where's the little bit of a difference? Israel. Israel cannot tell an athlete who is a Muslim or an Israeli athlete, he's an Israeli Arab, that, and he's the champion in kickboxing or in Taekwondo or something, or somebody else playing for the soccer team or the basketball team. And if he's a Christian Arab, a Muslim Arab, or whatever, we cannot tell them they cannot play in the Maccabiah. They're allowed to play because we're under the flag of Israel. We're not just under the flag of Judaism, Jewish, but we are under the flag of Israel. And we will not, there's no prevention of any of them participating. Coaches, by the way, that come from abroad do not have to be part of the contingency and don't have to be Jewish. But everybody else is supposed to be under each individual country will have their definition of who is a Jew and how can they participate in the Maccabiah Games.
How often are the games held?
So the World Maccabiah is every 4 years. And that's why I said it's almost like the Olympics. It's actually called the Jewish Olympics. And it's literally, we've had really great people come out here. We've had, Mitch Gaylord, and we've had really great athletes that were here that were also USA Olympians. And I'm just saying these are things that happen. So it's every 4 years. Now in America, we have the Youth Maccabi movement, which every 2 years will have a Youth Maccabi Games. And they'll have them in different places around the United States. And Israel usually will send a group, whether it be track and field or any of those other different events that they can be there. So it's like I said, it's every 4 years.
The U.S. Junior Games also is worldwide. We've had people from Brazil, Australia, as well as Israel, and they usually go to 3 or 4 locations each year or 2 years whenever it's held. And it's been very, very successful. Yes,
it has been. Okay.
Yeah, let's proceed with, please proceed. Now, there is another question which you did not answer yet on the chat, but let's, Alvin, we will not forget you. This will be answered in the end of the presentation, okay? So let's just.
Right, I see the chats now. It's the first time, I just didn't see the chats before. They're not popping up because it's in the 3 dots on the side. Okay, I just saw it now. Okay, so let's go a little further and we're gonna go to the Olympic Games now. Israel has participated since 1952. We've been in there since 1952, and I'm just going to touch on a few of the, I guess, I've actually been talking more there. I'm going to talk about more of the women's part of the sports here, because it's something that Yuli and I talked about and thought maybe that would be something really interesting more. And I'm going to go through a few of them, and I'm going to give you some names here. So in 1972 in Munich, as we all know, the tragedy of our 11 athletes. Esther Roth was her name was Esther Shachamorov at the time. She was a track athlete. She was a hurdler, and she was supposed to actually make it to the final in 72, but because of the tragedy that happened, her coach, as you can see here, Amitzur Shapira, who was one of the leading coaches for track and field in Israel, and actually brought this young girl. She was young at the time. She really became a historical person for sports in Israel. And then, of course, we had the 11 the 11 athletes who were murdered at the Munich Olympics. We have every year here in Israel, by the way, the National Olympic Committee and almost everybody who's interested in sports. There's a monument over in Tel Aviv where we all gather once a year, and we go there and we have a remembrance of our 11. They've actually built in Wingate Institute, one of our sports halls is named after the 11. They're called the Yud Aleph, as we would call it. And their plaques are almost in every sports organization throughout Israel. In 1988, Seoul Olympics in Yom Kippur. So just to let you know, remember I mentioned about how, you know, we sometimes have to follow the rules of the land. And one of the issues happened in 1988 Seoul Olympics, and I'm just going to mention here two men athletes, Yoel Sela and Eldad Amir. They finished fourth in the what they call the 470 sailing category. They could have won a medal. They could have won that first medal for us had they not refrained from participating because of Yom Kippur. They forfeited the one crucial race that could have given them the medal. There was a big discussion here in Israel. There's always been a discussion about it. The Saturdays have been already passed, which means the Saturdays, our athletes compete. But if it ever happens that it falls on Yom Kippur, then it is literally something that nobody will compete on Yom Kippur. We'll go back to Sandy Koufax, and now we're going to what the Yoel and Eldad did for Israel. The sacrifices that they made for that, and it was something that was very controversial in Israel, but I think mostly there was a more consensus that I guess that's what we're here for, and that's what happened at those times. In 1992, the Barcelona Olympics, that was our first Olympic medal, was won by Yael Arad. Today she is the second in command, as you would call, of the National Olympic Committee for Israel. It was really something. I don't think there was a tear. There was an eye without tears in Israel at the time. The first time ever that we got an Olympic medal, and it was something that was really, really important. And by the way, the same time, one of our other athletes, our men, also in the judo category. By the way, this was judo. I'm sorry I didn't mention it. In the judo category, he also took a medal, but only after she did. In the London Olympics, we had Lee Korzitz. This wasn't a medal, but it was really important because it was the beginning of Israel's push into really pushing the whole idea of the water sports. I will mention a little later, and we'll see him at the end of my presentation. You will see Gal Friedman, who in 2004 in Athens, he actually took the gold medal for sailing. And in 2006, we had Yarden Jerby, another one of our judokas, and she also took the bronze medal in Rio. And it was really something that, again, we were able to do. And it's mainly in judo, the different categories sort of gives us a little bit of an advantage there that we have different athletes in each one. Just in general, we've had 5 bronze, 1 silver, and 1 gold in all of the Olympics. And I guess that would be probably the main issue that we always talk about here in Israel. Everybody's running after the medal. Sometimes that's not the best thing to do. Sometimes it's more important for our children to be able to understand, be educated, and get the experiences of life through our sports. And I think that's what most of the sports are doing. But I'll get to the reason why we all run after that medal later as we talk about funding and things like that. All right, so now we can talk a little bit about politics and sports in Israel. How does that happen? What happens? So first of all, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but Israel's not Europe. We're Asia. And for years, in most of the competitions in the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, Israel participated in Asia, actually. And we played at the Asian Games. We were actually pretty good at track and field. We were good in all the basketball. We did very well in most of those tournaments in Asia. However, slowly but slowly, the things happened. 67 happened, and then the 6-Day War, and then a lot of other things happened, and then, of course, the boycott. The boycott happened when it started actually with the soccer team who were playing, and they were boycotted, and they were not allowed to play in one of the Asian tournaments. And in the end, we were left without playing anywhere. And that's when the European Union came to our rescue, and they actually allowed the soccer of Israel to join the European Federation of Soccer Associations. Today it's called UEFA, and that's what happened since the boycott, that most of our sports have actually moved into Europe. So gradually, basketball is now in Europe, soccer, Europe, track and field, Europe, baseball, softball. Everybody's now in Europe. We have no connection to the Asian sports federations. We don't have anything to do with Asian Games. And I'm going to tell you a little story, where even the Europeans are acting sometimes not as fair, but even though they did let us in. So if most of you know that our baseball team, which is mainly of American Jewish guys who have joined the team, made it to the Olympics for 2020, but it'll be in 2021. And one of the things that happened was that when we won the one spot for Europe. There's only 6 teams going to be playing, and there was only one spot for Europe to be played at the Olympics. So we were in a big meeting. I'm also Secretary General. It's like the executive director of the European and baseball softball. And we were in a meeting, and the Netherlands got up, and they actually said, but you guys are not in Europe. And I was really happy that Germany and all the other countries got up and just said, what are you talking about? For years, they've been here since the 80s. And all of a sudden, because they won, we're bringing this up now that they're not Europe and they're not representing Europe. Of course they are. They've been playing in Europe for so many years. They've been doing things with Europe for so many years that it just wasn't, it was something out of the blue, actually. I was sitting at the head desk and I heard this come out, and I looked and I just couldn't believe that somebody would bring that up. But in the end, of course, like I said, we had a really great backing from everybody else that was on the floor and listening to that. So it was just something that, there's something in there that you always say something about that can always raise your what your concepts are of what's happening in Europe with Israel all the time. Politics in Israel sports. That, of course, and I think in the United States also, and everywhere in every country, there's always something that's happening. Who's going to get chosen for national teams? How are we picking them? What is the balance of power in Israel sports? Does track and field have more influence than the baseball or the softball? Does soccer and basketball, are they considered the top sports of Israel and everybody else doesn't matter? So I'm going to give you a little bit of what's happening. I'm not sure if everybody knows about Maccabi and Hapoel. So Maccabi I actually mentioned, Maccabi Europe and all that. Hapoel was more the socialist organization that worked and had most of the workers' unions creating different kinds of sports throughout Israel. And what happened was, so Hapoel we call them the red, and Maccabi's the blue. So that's strange out here. I know red and blue, but here it's also red and blue, but it's Hapoel and Maccabi. Now, the thing that happened was that at one point they were both at a really strong position. They both had strong positions. And so they decided at one point in a meeting in the 50s, I think it was, they said, we're going to divide the sports up. 50-50. They called it the 50-50 deal. And what happened was, because the organization, the sports organization of Israel, has all these different sports in them, what they did, they sat down and they said, okay, volleyball, Maccabi, basketball, Maccabi, soccer, Hapoel. And they literally divided the Israel sports up to a 50-50. And anything that happened in each of their organizations, it was always going to be 50-50 as division of the sports. Now, if Maccabi supposedly got something like basketball, on their board in basketball, they would have a 60-40 majority by agreement, which means Hapoel would have 40% on there, but Maccabi would have 60. And this was a law. It wasn't a law, but it was something that was ruled through the years. And until this day, they still have pieces of federations, associations within Israel sports that are divided up like this. And there have been a few people that have tried to get up, raising my hand as one of them, to try and break that bond and just consider this as sports. This is nothing else, and it's not really big business because we don't make a lot of money in sports in Israel. But in the end, there's still a hold within the Maccabi and Hapoel dividing up the sports, and they still are the top centers. We've created some other centers in Israel, but in general, that's what actually runs the sports in Israel. So we have 3 organizations that run the different sports, and I'm going to put them all 3 of them up here now. So we have the National Olympic Committee, which deals with all the Olympic sports. So anything that has to do, and I'm going to put baseball and softball on the side for a second, but track and field, gymnastics, rhythm gymnastics, swimming, judo, all of those, basketball, soccer, those are under the heading of the National Olympic Committee, which means they take care of any of the Olympic teams that make it, or any of the Olympic athletes that make it to the Olympics to represent Israel. They're in charge of. They're in charge of those athletes and those sports. We have another organization called the Non-Olympic Sports, and that non-Olympic sport actually is are all the sports that are not in the Olympics. But however, we do have world championships, European championships, world games. The next world games, which I'll mention at the end of the presentation, will be in Birmingham, Alabama in 2022. And we will send a contingency of our athletes. And actually, that organization, and Ilana, you're there, it's called Ayelet. So I don't know if Steve can say Ayelet, but that's called the Ayelet organization.
Oh, he can't.
Okay, there you go. See, I knew that already. I'm learning. I'm a quick learner. So the Ayelet organization is actually the non-Olympic organization, which, by the way, usually holds baseball and softball. But because we are now an Olympic sport, and I'll talk to you that, I'll say that, I'll get back to that in a minute. We're under the umbrella of the Olympic Committee until next year, because in 2024, in the Olympics in Paris, there will be no baseball or softball. So that's a non-Olympic. And of course, we have our National Paralympics Committee, which is also, as I'm not sure you all know, but we've had more medals in the Paralympics than we've had in everybody else combined. I think there's been over 380 medals in the Paralympics. And I think that is something, again, we have a lot of people that are, with issues that they couldn't be, in the regular Olympics. So this is what happens, and that's what's happening here now, is that we have most of the medals that we get, we actually do get them through that. All right, Pride of Israel, success of women in our sports. I'm just going to go really quick through some of the stuff. So I've mentioned, of course, the judo. That's Yael Arad. When she got her medal, she was jumping. I think everybody else was jumping at the same time. She won the bronze. And there is Yarden Jerby. She also got the bronze in 2016. So we were all proud of them, those two. And then, of course, artistic gymnastics and gymnastics. Our young girls are actually pretty good. They took the European Championships last year. And we have another athlete by the name of Linoy Ashram. She's taken world championships. She's really one of our top artistic gymnasts, and she literally is probably one of our hopes for an Olympic gold in gymnastics for the first time. Again, I'm probably one of the only ones who do not like to say we're going for the gold. I like to say it in the back of my head and not say it out loud too much. And if we get it, I can say it. If we don't get it, I can say we tried. So that's Linoy. And of course, everybody mentioned we've got basketball from Maccabi Tel Aviv to our national teams. They've always been the women's teams have always been progressive. We do still have, they're really minor. They're not really progressing as much as we want them to, but they're good. The volleyball team also is pretty, very good. And of course, we've had soccer accomplishments also in the past. One of the other sports Yulia didn't maybe mention. By the way, I'm the executive director of softball in Israel. Fast pitch softball, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned that. This is all fast pitch softball. But I'm also the president of Israel's track and field. So I run the track and field in Israel. And I'm going to tell you two stories here. This is Luna Chamtai. Now, I'm sure all you know that we have a lot of Ethiopians that made Aliyah way back then on the carpet, the Shlomo carpet. And what happened was, so Luna is not one of those Ethiopians. We've had pretty good success now with a lot of marathon runners from these, the children of the people that made Aliyah from Ethiopia. They're the ones who are now really progressing, and they've been training and they've been bringing a lot of pride to Israel. Luna Chamtai did something really special. And Luna, she's one of our top athletes today. She was the babysitter, the nanny, I would more say, of the Kenyan ambassador of Israel. She had no prior experience of running or any, no real, competitive running or anything. She's just a jogger. So she would be jogging through the Ramat Gan park, and she saw a bunch of other runners, Ethiopians, that were training under a guy named Dan Selpeter, one of our coaches from track and field. She saw them. She asked if she can join them. And after she joined them, they fell in love. They got married. They have a child, and he coached her through the years, and she became the European champion in the 10,000 meters. And she, it's years already. She's been here for so many years already. So she's literally an Israeli and everything. And like I said, she holds up the flag as if it's her own. And I can tell you, this was in Berlin, by the way, at the Berlin Stadium. And she won the 10,000 meters, the European Championships in Berlin, which was, I don't think I didn't, I had to go back in the back room because I was there because I had tears coming down. I couldn't believe that was something that was done. And to hear Hatikva in the center, because we had the podiums were in the center of Berlin. And the podium and hearing Hatikva in the middle of Berlin was something very special to most of us, and it was very special. Another one of our athletes is Hannah Menenko. She's a triple jumper. She finished fifth in the World Championships and fourth in the Olympics, which is an incredible feat. And in the end, she missed only by a few centimeters of getting our first medal in track and field. But we're hopefully going to happen that we will be getting one soon. Okay, I'm going to go right through the softball dream. So the softball dream, Israel softball began in 1979. There were a bunch of Americans and South American immigrants who came to Israel, and they were usually the men, and they played fast pitch softball. And it's something that, when we hear softball, we always talk about slow pitch. But here it's more, when it came to Israel, it was more the fast pitch era. And we started to play the game here from 79. Baseball started a few years later, but it wasn't really at the highest level. It was mainly for the kids because the fathers took the kids out, just like you would do in America, and they played with their kids. Today we have a bunch of Israelis who play both baseball and softball. Again, not at the levels that we can. Remember, we're in Israel. A team in Germany can go to the Netherlands by car and compete and play against them. Here, we'd have to fly out and go all over Europe and find places to play, which was really difficult. So the progress was a little slower. Israel softball was accepted, like I told you. We were accepted to the European Federation in 1994. And then we started to really build what we call our national teams. So really quick, the men's national team was the first one because, like I said, this was more like a men's fast pitch thing. We didn't have our women playing at the time. And the men's national team has been progressed for many years, and we've been in European championships. We participated once in 1996 where I pitched for the men's Israeli national team in Midland, Michigan at the World Championships. And everybody else was, we played at the Europeans. We've taken 4th, 5th. We haven't medaled, but right now we're in a position where we're getting a lot better and everything. Our junior men's national program also, it grew to the extent of how, really they've progressed. They even made it to one world championship and represented Israel. And just seeing the flag being, held up high in most of these tournaments is very important. Our junior girls national team started also along with our women's national team, and we've actually created a form of national teams that can represent Israel throughout. Just a little thing about the junior national team. So I don't know if you've heard this, but before any national team that goes abroad in sports, because of the Munich issue, we all have to go through a lecture from one of the government people that come to tell them how we're supposed to behave, where we're supposed to be, and then they also send somebody with us, plus local police will always be with our national teams. So we're always guarded, we're always with people. Some places we're not, but most of them we are. We're told we have to be on one floor. They'll have somebody there 24/7, down in the lobby, down upstairs. Every time we get on a bus, they have to check the buses. We went to one of the tournaments in Europe, and it was pretty far off. And, nobody really thought of anything. So they didn't have any security for us. And really nothing happened. I got a phone call the day after the girls left, the junior girls. And one of my friends who was running the tournament, he said, Ami, I just got to tell you, we found the Israeli flag burned. Somebody burnt our Israeli flag, but after the games. I guess everybody was afraid to come close during the games. The flag was held up for over the night and in the evening. We told that, and we really, like we said, we don't hold anything against anybody or anything like that. Just some crazy people that would do things. And that's why we have these security issues every time we go abroad. Our women's national team, this is where the dream really begins. We've had our women's national team compete since 2002. And through the years, we were sometimes in the 10th place, 11th place, 12th. There were times then we dropped down to the 20th place. I mean, it was pretty difficult to do it. And plus, you got to understand in Israel, okay, can I ask anybody out there, how many fields do you think we have in Israel? How many baseball or softball fields do you think we have in Israel?
20.
Okay, next.
A dozen.
A dozen. Anybody else?
50. 50.
Wow. Okay.
How about 5?
How many? Ilana?
5.
Wow, you're close.
It's not so much how
So
many
in Israel, excuse me?
Because it's not so much how many. None of them are not in great condition. That's also the problem.
Who has many?
It's not so much how many there are, but a number of them are not in great physical condition.
So we have one at Kibbutz Gezer, which was held by JNF a little bit. We have one where the IBL was, which is called the Baptist Village because it is a Baptist village, and they built the field for us. There's a baseball and a softball field. Those are 2 fields, but the one at Gezer is only 1 field where we play baseball and softball on both of them. And then we have Sport Tech is completely knocked out. And then we have in Maor. There you go, Yulia. This is where we had a donor from actually Pennsylvania. And the Alvin M. Levine Field, it's called, from Philadelphia. And we built a field, which was a multi-purpose field. And literally I can say because of that field, most of the national team players grew up on that field. So today, most of the players are there, and most of the players that grew up in Gezer or in Tel Aviv are the ones that are playing now and things. So we've actually really got 3 fields. I would call it 2.5 because the Maor field's more like a junior field. So that's just something to contemplate when you think about what we're talking about here as to softball fields and the dream. So at one point, I decided that in 2007, because 2008 was going to be the last time baseball and softball were going to be the Olympics, I decided to reach out to my friends in the United States and go find Jewish heritage girls with Jewish backgrounds to play for Israel. And I found 40 players. We had tryouts. We did everything we could. We had all their paperwork done for them. They got papers from the rabbis. They got their background checks. We were all set to go, and they were supposed to compete at the European qualifier for the 2 spots. Then it was 2 spots and not 1 for the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing. Well, because of certain issues that happened and popped up, it didn't happen. But we did get to know a lot of 40 of those great girls who really wanted to give their lives and their what they could do for Israel. In the end, we couldn't do. But what happened was after the baseball and softball were taken out of the Olympics, we were reinstated for 2020 because it was in Tokyo. And Tokyo is basically, as everybody knows, baseball and softball are pretty up high there. And thus, Tokyo requested that baseball and softball be there. And thus, we are there. And we recruited all our softball dream girls. This was Israel's softball national team that competed in 2019 at the European Championships in order to try and get the ticket to the Olympics. Like the men did, that's what we tried to. Some of our players see their uniforms that were made, and this was something that really we were hoping was going to work. For the men in the baseball, it worked. For our softball girls, they took 9th place. They only had 2 losses out of the 9 games they played, but what can I say? The one important game that they were supposed to win, they actually lost, and to our regret, that's what happened. However, the dream is, of course, not done, because right now we are shooting for, again, a group of young girls. Some of the girls are coming back. We've recruited another 17 players from America. We have under 18 players, girls who are under 18. We have others that are in NCAA Division 1, 2, and 3. We have a Division 1 coach who's going to be coaching them, along with our Israeli coach over here. And we're shooting to try and get the ticket to the World Games in 2022 in Birmingham, Alabama. And of course, the biggest dream of all is going to be the LA 2028. Why do I say LA 2028? It's because 2024 will be Paris. We are not in the Olympics. It's already known. They're going to have break dancing instead of baseball and softball. Just letting you know, break dancing will be an Olympic sport now. Again, some might like it, some might not, but that's something with us in the sports view sort of hurt us. But in the end, I can tell you that 2028 will be LA, and you can almost be sure that the LA local organizing committee will request to have baseball and softball in their games. And so we're looking and we're pushing to get all these young Israelis and Americans, all Jewish heritage, to come to Israel to do this. And I'm going to show you something, as I would call it, the ultimate goal. If you don't mind 1 more minute, I want to show you what the ultimate goal will be. Hold on a second. I've got to see if I can do this. I got to stop sharing this. And I will share 1 more thing with you. And maybe 2 more things. Hold on a second. Where is that? There it is. And this is what our ultimate goal is. Bear with me. Up. The ultimate goal. Share. Tell me if you can hear this. I hope you can. If you can't, give me a thumbs down. Just 1 second.
Nothing.
You can't hear it?
No.
Hold on. There is a way that I can do that where it says I can share the sound. Hold on. Share sound. Okay. Tell me if you can hear it now.
Gal Friedman.
Good.
Gal Friedman. מישראל על הפודיום, מדליית זהב במסטרל אתונה 2004. לכל אורך הדרך, גל פרידמן אמר, גם גור שטיינברג, גם יהודה מעיין אמרו, מדליית זהב זו המטרה. גל פרידמן הגולש היחיד מבין כל הגולשים בתחרות שסיים את כל השיוטים בעשירייה הראשונה, ואחרי ההישג הזה מדליית זהב זה בהחלט ראוי לה.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, ο εθνικός ύμνος του Ισραήλ.
עכשיו התקווה ודגל ישראל בראש שלושת הדגלים.
The national anthem of Israel.
Okay, let me just shut that down for a second, really quick. Hold on, boom. Do that. You can hang on 1 second. Can't see any of you. Hold on. So you can hear me, right? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I hate to say this, but every time I see it, I get a tear to my eye. It was a gold medal at the Olympics. It wasn't track and field, but it was one of the gold Olympics. It was one of the things that really puts something to our hearts here in Israel. Again, it's not always that's the only reason. I don't know if you noticed, but the second place person was the Greek. And it was Greece who was there who we beat. So it was the Hellenistic thing, going back to the Judaism. I went all the way around, circled around back. We can do it, and that's what it's all about. There's one more thing I wanted to show you before I end this. And we had a training camp now with all these new American girls. I was in Las Vegas. We had a training camp with a bunch of these girls that are recruiting. And I wanted just to show you one thing, if you don't mind. Hold on. Where is it? All right. There it is. I'm going to try and share this with you. One more thing. It's very short. And then we can say goodbye. This is what was at one of the practices. All of a sudden, they had this boom box. I was sitting to the side, and they just got together in the middle of their thing. Hopefully I'm going to share this, the sound again. I'm going to share sound. It should. Tell me if you can hear it when I start it. Hang on. was it. That's all I had to say today. I hope that was okay. I didn't really know where I was going with this, but in the end, I hope this was enjoyable, and that if you have questions now, we can go to questions, and I'm ready for anything.
Thank you so much, Ami. I always say, everyone knows I'm not a sports person. I'm a theater person. And I said the only time I care about sports is when Israel's in the Olympics, which is completely true. So thank you. I learned so much.
It was a great presentation. Thank you, Ami. It was really, really, we learned a lot, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you. We do have a few questions here, and I guess we will keep getting more questions as we move. So could you look at the chat, or would you like me to read it for you?
I'm looking at the chat right now.
Okay,
so
great. Okay, so let's start with the first question was the one after the first break by Alvin. Can you describe the training facility Canada in Metula?
Okay, so the training facility that I know of in Metula is where they, of course, they do the hockey. And that's where they have most of it. That's where it happens. They've actually had more. I think they did one also now in Chulon, and there was one in Hod HaSharon, so that they can move, because it was really difficult for them only to do Metula, which is, pretty far in the north, right on the border. And that's the one that they mainly used. They used for that one time for the skating rink, because that's where we all used to go. If you wanted to go skating in Israel, we'd go to Metula.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, there was a question. Let's see. Okay. Oh, yes. Harry's question. Does Israel have a larger percent of population in Paralympic because of wounded warriors? Is it a higher per capita than other countries, or is it that Israel devotes more funds for the Paralympics?
So funding for Paralympics, again, we receive funding. Everybody receives funding. Remember I said we have the Olympic Committee, the non-Olympic Committee, and we have the Paralympics. Everybody receives a certain amount from government. The Paralympics don't receive more money than anybody else. But yes, a lot of our athletes are people that have been injured through the through the different wars and everything like that, or anything has to do with the military. Do we have more than everybody else? I'm not so sure, but I think there's more of a drive with our athletes, and they're actually pretty good. And even our swimmers and everything like that, they're at high levels. So I can say that, yes, on one side, but I'm not so sure that there's a big difference between everybody else. But we do put a lot of effort into our Paralympics. We actually help them out a lot.
Okay. Steve's question, how do you integrate with IDF?
How do athletes become? So what happens with athletes, and that's something we didn't touch, was when you become 18, you have to go to the Army. The Army provides for athletes, dancers, musicians, and I can't remember if there's a fourth category. They allow for about 500 of them per entry into the Army, to per cycle, as I would call it, to be in the Army as recognized as an athlete, musician, or whatever. So we get athletes who become, somebody asked me about Racheli Constantine. So Racheli was an athlete in the Army. She actually received it, and she's allowed to, what they do, they put you in a day job, and you're supposed to be in the Army for about 5 to 6 hours, and then you can go home and you do your training. You can come late, you can come early, and you have 90 days off a year to go and compete or train, and training camps and things like that.
Okay. Now, how do you integrate with regional high schools? That's Steve's question.
With what?
With regional high schools.
Okay, so there's a big issue now. High schools, my wife, she's one of the teachers here, phys ed teachers, also in charge of the 7th and 8th and 9th grades and everything. Sports have been going down in the schools. And as I know some of my friends in the States too, it's been really, really bad. It's like they're taking that out, and we're trying to get into schools more. When we built our field in Maor, I actually also received funding. We called it the Educational Fund, where we were allowed and again, you pay not a lot of money, but for coaches to go into the schools and teach the kids the game of baseball, softball. Of course, it's for the little kids and everything. So we would pay for them to go into these schools and give them extra sports. Now, the principals of these high schools and sports, they're glad if we can pay for it, then of course, if he has to pay for the counselors to come in, then of course it's not going to happen. So I've always gone out and tried to find the funding to pay for our people to go into the schools and train. So it's not easy, but we do have what we call competitions throughout Israel that the high schools do, and it's mainly in volleyball, basketball, soccer, and team handball. Those are the biggest four events. And track and field, of course. They also do track and field.
Okay. Next question is, have you been in contact with any of the Jewish former MLB players that coached in IBL?
So, yeah, I mean.
One of these questions which I don't understand, so go for it.
Okay.
Like Art Shamsky?
What's that?
Like Art Shamsky or Ron Bloomberg or Ken Holtzman?
Yeah. So Ron, I haven't been in touch with Ron. With Shamsky, I was in touch with every time I go to New York. Got in the background here, even though I'm going from Chicago. I meet with Art, and most of these people that are involved, we're still connected. A lot of us, the coaches and the players mainly. I'm more connected to the players because I was probably, at the time, I was the youngest of the coaches that were there, out of the 6 coaches. And I was probably the less experienced one. So, by the way, just a little story on that. We were playing Ron Blumenthal's team, the Beit Shemesh, I forgot what the Sox, and we were the Netanya Tigers. And they wanted a Shamsky-Bloomberg final. And I was winning. So Larry Veras, who was coming over, he says, Ami, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? He says, we can't have a Shamsky-Baran final. We need a Shamsky-Bloomberg final. Who's Baran? So he was laughing. It was a joke. But in the end, I lost anyhow, and it was a Shamsky-Bloomberg final. So
Okay. Are you familiar with the name Dave Dombey, who started baseball for kids years ago? Dave Dombey?
I'm trying to see the name. Dave Dombey. Who asked this? Is Barbara?
Barbara, yes.
I'm not familiar with Dave, where he started. Where did he start exactly? Because there's different regions here in Israel where they started. One of the guys who started baseball in the beginnings in the 70s was, of course, a guy named Randy Kahn. But other than that, there were a few others that got in. I don't know Dave personally.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, any further
IBL.
questions?
You got the IBL hat. She has the IBL hat.
IBL, because I have to.
Wow.
I was the Tel Aviv fan, so I live in Tel Aviv. But we went to all the games, and in fact, my daughter got married that summer, and a bunch of Steve Hertz. I've stayed in touch with Steve Hertz and his wife. And
Steve, yeah.
a bunch of them came to we invited them to my daughter's wedding because we said, you guys are in Chicago, in Israel, you have to come to an Israeli wedding. So we just had a bunch of them come to the wedding. So it was great. It was just great.
On me, I still have a Willie Mays hat.
Lots of Sarel people who were on the programs at the time. We took them to baseball games for we took them as a tiul for one of the Sarel things. And
for the IBL games.
And we took them to different games. So we made them.
So they might have seen me.
Absolutely.
Probably. Ami, there is another question by Bruce. Could Israel host the Olympics?
No. Simple answer. No.
Yeah. Why not? Why not?
We don't. It's more about facilities. There are a lot of political decisions. I mean, I can get into a bunch of things here, and it would be, I wish we could. I've actually got something I will tell you. Here's something very interesting. I had some facts that I had written down. In 1968, the Paralympic Games were held in Tel Aviv, after the Mexican government cited technical difficulties in hosting the contest alongside the Olympic best. So the Paralympics in 1968 were held here in Israel. So that's the one thing that I can tell you. I don't believe that we can have the Olympics here. We can have European championships. We can have world championships, I think, in certain things. But we don't have the, again, question is, would people be coming? There's a whole, it's a batch full of things that we'd have to get through to have something like that.
Well, we did have the Eurovision, though. We did have the Eurovision.
Right.
Okay. By the way, guys, something I really wanted to see. I hope you can see it. This is Muki. What's his last name? Oh my God! He was a world champion in judo. In
Sagi Muki.
Yeah, exactly. Sagi Muki. So he's a world champion, and this is my daughter Yael. She's a former judoka. She was a judoka till she was in 5th grade, and then she quit. And then here, another photo. You normally see Noam, so this time you can see Yael, and this is Yael with Yarden Jerby. Okay, the
one who won in 2016.
Exactly. So yeah.
So really, just one little antidote. Just so you know, I don't know if you heard lately in the news the other day that the judoka Said Molai showed up to Israel. Said Molai, he's the who couldn't compete against our guys. He ran away from Iran. He got what is it? I forgot. He got
Mongolian.
Now he's a Mongolian. And he came to Israel. He landed here the other day. Well, my good friend, who's the president of the judo, he met him at the airport. And look, that's a step forward for a lot of things for us.
And now they're competing within Israeli. Yeah, that was on the news, I think,
the
today,
Grand Prix.
maybe yesterday. Right. Okay.
Ami?
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Yes.
Does this look familiar?
Oh, that's my clincher. That's the Chicago ball.
That's the Chicago ball. That's right.
I have one up here. You guys can't see my thing, but up there I got all my medals and all my bats and whatever you want, and I still have my Chicago ball. So
we're in Chicago.
If you want.
We're in Chicago.
So all right. So it's in between Lincolnwood and Skokie, but it was like on Bryn Mawr, Peterson, Hollywood, Christiana, Spalding.
I'm from Chicago, West Rogers Park and Lincolnwood.
Oh, West Rogers Park. There you go.
Jeffrey Manor, South Side.
What
Outside,
about
there you go.
basketball? What about professional basketball?
What about it?
I mean, is it popular? I mean, I see things. I see players from the U.S. that are playing there. Is it much of a league? And
yeah, so I can tell you that in Israel, soccer and basketball are like put to the side because they're the professional sports. So they literally have millions to run their programs. They have a lot of kids trying to make it to the Maccabi Tel Avivs. It's pretty good and pretty high level. Putting on my hat as track and field and as baseball and softball, my only thing that I always say is, when was the last time we went to soccer or in basketball to an Olympics or to a European championship? Now, basketball, I will say, did make it, but once out of 20 times. And then the question that always, there's a big issue, like I remember talking about politics and sports in Israel, is why are they getting all this money? And we have athletes that are struggling to make it to an Olympic. They're barely making $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month to live and to do that, and they have to train every day in order to get the medal for Israel in the Olympics. So there's a big issue that happens here in the Israeli government. If we look at the priorities of Israel, and I had a meeting with the Minister of Sports when he started. He didn't know if he was going to last 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Well, we now know he's not going to last for a year. But in any case, he was going to be there. He said to me, "What do you guys think I need to do?" So everybody brought in what they needed and all that. And I said to him, "There's one thing I need you to do. If on the ladder of priorities, sports is number 10. If you bring us up to number 8, you did your job. Go home. That'll be it. Just get me up there. Get me up to where we're a priority in Israel." And not like we were in the Hellenistic time when sports wasn't even considered. Bye, Carol. Bye, Carol and Larry.
טוב, עמי, תודה רבה. היה נהדר, באמת תודה רבה. Thank you so much, and good night, and be well, safe, healthy, and that's it, and no COVID. So see you in the grocery.
Nice meeting you all. I'm really happy. Thank you for what you're doing for Israel, by the way. Thank you for what you're doing for Israel.
Thank you very much.
Incredible.
תודה רבה.
Julia, thank you very much, Julia, for inviting me.
ממש העונג כולו שלי, אני אשמח להזמין אותך שוב, אין שום בעיה.
And we'd love to hear the other subject you talk about too.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's
So Julia mentioned, just so that you know, Julia mentioned I was a lawyer, but it was more, I usually give lectures a lot of times on the terrorism part, because I dealt with more than 20 different terrorist attacks and things like that in the West Bank. That's where I was in charge of investigation and intelligence. I usually travel and give lectures on that. I told that to Julia. And my lawyer part wasn't always into it. It was more my investigating and intelligence more.
But that about the terrorism, that's perfect for this group.
Right. So we will make sure that we invite Ami again. And actually, well, just between you and me, Ilana, we already have a date for his next presentation. So that was supposed to be a secret, but here it is. Okay, you know, we are all friends. So we already have a new date to meet Ami, and as you heard, he is a great speaker. So I'm sure you will enjoy again.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Ami, I have a question, Ami. At Sport Tech, they're tearing down the whole. I mean, they're rebuilding something there. What are they doing? Are they making
the Rakevet Akala?
Oh,
they're putting in the what do you call it? It's like the little. It's a tram.
An easy train.
An easy train, the light rail. Yeah. And so they're moving the baseball field away, and now we're in discussions with them, with the Sport Tech people, to move it and build a proper field. We've actually had a presentation the other day for funding, but I had a big fight today with the Tel Aviv people inside the municipality, and we're afraid they won't let us build it there. So.
Oh, that's terrible. I was so excited. I thought they were redoing the field.
Not yet, no.
Great.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Ami.
Bye, Lana. Bye, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.